All right, welcome to episode 98 of the Slip and Weave podcast. A quick recap of Canelo Alvarez's one-sided decision victory over John Ryder. Um, this was not the best Canelo performance. This was certainly not his most exciting or explosive. But at the end of the day, it was a dominant win over a top probably 7 or 8 guy in his division. I think because he's been such a dominant fighter for the last 4 or 5 years, um, and in many ways has been praised as, the pound for pound best fighter in the sport. He does get held to a higher standard, which I think just happens naturally when you're the top guy, right? You're going to get held to a different standard than other fighters sometimes. If I'm holding him to the standard that he's upheld himself for the entirety of his career, it's not a great performance, right? Was a little flat. He didn't have a lot of bop in his movement. There wasn't a lot of upper body movement. There wasn't the swaggy, slick, defensive Canelo that we've gotten so used to. It was a real high guard, walk forward, throw punches, block punches, much more plotting, much more simple in his approach. There's a lot of factors, right? Guy's only 32 years old, but he's had 63 or 64 fights in his career. This being the 59th win of his career. He just had wrist surgery, right? So I've had surgery on my wrist. You go back, you listen to episode 8 of this show. I kind of explain my boxing story. You go check that out if you're interested. But part of how this show got started was having a similar surgery to what Canelo had. And I could tell you that it does take a while, even just as a casual guy that was hitting the bag and working out. Like, it takes you a minute to feel like you can let your hands go in an uninhibited way. And if he had the surgery 5 months ago, I mean, I don't know the exact details of his surgery, but my surgery was 4.5, 5 month recovery between the physical therapy. And, he's getting the best care in the world. But it took me 4 or 5 months just to get it functional, let alone be in a fight. So you don't know how uninhibited he's feeling letting his hands go. You don't know how natural and flowing he's feeling, because even if he's gotten himself to a point where he can fight, he couldn't have been training for that long, depending on what the surgery is. So he may not have been the sharpest he's ever been, right? I think those are all factors to take into consideration. I would also bring up the 61 fights because that's a lot of miles. He's a young guy, but he's got a lot of miles. So I think a combination, and I would consider an injury like that miles to some extent. You know what I mean? Like, that's just having a lot of fights, a lot of years of training. That sounds like an overuse injury. I mean, maybe he had a traumatic event. I'm not fucking a doctor or anything, but those are generally kind of overuse injuries. So, I think that Canelo's still got a lot in the tank. And I even if at this point, the way he fought this fight, I would not favor him over Bivol. I just have an incredible amount of respect for the fact that he wants that fight, that he wants to do the tradition of champions, which is avenge your loss, right? Even if the first one wasn't particularly close, right? It was a pretty particularly down the stretch of the fight, it was pretty one-sided for Bivol. Maybe Canelo got 4 rounds in. And has not looked his best in his last 2 fights, right? The Golovkin third fight, there was sort of like an unspoken agreement, it seemed like, about how they were going to go about that third fight. It wasn't going to have the same tenacity that the first 2 had. So I think that part was mutual, and Canelo tried in spots to make the fight. At least he was kind of coming forward more. And in this one, he did try to bring the fight almost to a fault. I would have liked to have seen him get up and box a little and outclass this guy, and just, think about how many times Canelo's best offense comes off his head movement, right? He slips he does a quick rock back right hand, he slips down, throws the left hook to the body. A lot of his best offense comes off his head movement and his defense. We just didn't really see that guy. So at least for me, before he fights Bivol, I'd like to see him in with somebody else and see him get back to that a little more. But he's an absolute legend, and he's one of the great competitors of this time, and he's going to fight who he wants to fight, and he wants to avenge that loss, and you got to respect it. Just a quick note from the undercard: Alexander Vojtich making his return, light heavyweight champion, ended the reign of Adonis Stevenson, ultimately put him into retirement. He came back on this card, and he's been making a comeback. I think this might have been his second fight back, but 3.5 years off after losing by 11th round TKO to Artur Beterbiev, obviously one of the top 2 light heavyweights in the world. I thought he stops. I believe his name is Bolotniks in the 7th round, 6th round, somewhere in there. But I thought he looked good. He's a guy that I have a lot of respect for. He's got great boxing skills, tall, long, rangy, tremendous footwork. Gave Beterbiev a hell of a fight in their first go. You know, I see him particularly at light heavyweight at this moment where there's not a huge talent pool. I definitely see him as a viable player. He's 36 years old, but he doesn't have a lot of mileage outside of that Beterbiev fight. So I was just surprised. I thought he looked good. I had no idea that he was coming back. I'm curious to know more about his motivations for coming back. So if you know, comment below, or even his motivations for retiring at the time that he did. You know, he was still a top 3-4 guy in the division. So really interesting to see his comeback. Really looking forward to that, and seeing how he progresses in the next couple of fights. My guest this week is somebody that I grew up watching on the Broadway Boxing series. A tremendous retired fighter from Brooklyn, now the head of Salita Promotions, promotes some very, very exciting fighters in the sport of boxing. Enjoy my interview with Brooklyn legend Dmitry Salita. All right, welcome to episode 98 of the Slip and Wait podcast. I'm here with the head of Salita Promotions and retired boxer from Brooklyn, New York, Dmitry Salita. Dmitry, thank you so much for coming on today, boss.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So just real quick, I always like to just let people introduce themselves and kind of give everybody the Spark Notes version of who you are in boxing, your career, and whatever you want to highlight.
Well, that's quite a well, I mean, my name is Dmitry Salita, and I've boxed since I was very young. I joined Star City Boxing at the age of 13 and won numerous tournaments as an amateur and as a professional, and transitioned into being a promoter, which is what I do now, and represent some of the best fighters in the world. We have a great event on June 3rd, which I believe is historic, where Claressa Shields is going to open up Little Caesars Arena for its first night of professional boxing, which is going to be on the Zone. June 9th, we have the Hall of Fame weekend show on Showtime, Showbox, featuring incredible fights. So it's a busy month, and working hard to service our fighters, and most important, to get the boxing fans exciting matchups, which I believe both shows will have.
And we'll definitely get into some of those. But real quick, one of the reasons that I'm excited to talk to you today, specifically to you, is that I kind of grew up and was like a young man and a teenager during the Broadway boxing days. And that was kind of right when I first got into boxing. So funny enough, that whole class of guys, you, Paulie, Peter Quillen, Curtis Stevens, I could keep going, but there was a bunch of you guys that I was like a really big fan of coming up. And so can you speak at all to your experience fighting on that series? And
Sure. So, wow, great memory. So Um, Lou DiBella was my second promoter. I was first signed with Top Rank, and one of the reasons why I signed with DiBella is because Top Rank was not at that time was not doing any shows on the East Coast, and I had a growing uh, fan base in New York City, and Broadway Boxing made a lot of sense. And it's what it was. It's Broadway Boxing when it was, I would say, at its peak. And the Chin Checkers with Curtis Stevens and J. Dunn Codrington, who from Stereo City Boxing Club, who I grew up with. So great to fight on those cars. Andre Berto for, I think he made his pro debut on one of my cars. Yeah, it was a great experience. It was great New York boxing shows. So there was somewhere between club shows and big time championship boxing, somewhere in between that, and featured some of the best prospects in the sport of boxing, many times tested in very good competitive fights. Amazing atmosphere at Hammerstein Ballroom, at Manhattan Center, Roseland Ballroom, and I felt very privileged to have been a significant part of that. And I just last week I attended Lou's Broadway Boxing show in New York City, which was at Sony Hall, I believe, and
They do
just,
great shows there.
they do great shows. Yeah, and just it's just a certain flavor of New York City boxing that you don't get at these big events. It's something that's very special, and that as a boxing fan, which is most important, I love and enjoy, and it was just great to be a part of it. And it kind of didn't even really matter who was in the ring because it just had a certain flavor to it. People standing outside, and it's great to see that Lou is still putting on those events. Probably the longest running boxing series in New York, I think. And it's great experience for me to have been a part of that.
Yeah, and basically all you guys wound up fighting on HBO or some other larger
Yeah.
platform after that. So it really was kind of like a big stepping stone. I think
Well, of course, I fought on television before it and after, but it was a good gap. At some point, I feel that I I graduated from Broadway Boxing, and because I sold so many tickets, you know, Luke kept me on it a little past my due date, so to say, and and that's what really caused my tension with him, and the reason why we actually split is because commercially I was such a success. I was selling so many tickets, but on a boxing level, I wanted to progress. I wanted to get the bigger opportunities. So sometimes the business and the boxing clash, and that was another great experience for me, for myself, experiencing certain feelings and going through with certain things was a great learning experience. And one of the things that experiences like this is what helps me be successful in the position that I'm at now.
what was the ultimate kind of decision to retire, I guess, as early or as young as you did? Obviously, I mean, you had whatever, damn near 40 fights, but you were still like a pretty young guy. What were some of the decisions that went into that?
So yeah, so first, first of all, I never really retired officially, and after my last fight, I kind of had those back and forth of coming back. I'm not gonna fight again. I'm just saying.
Okay, I didn't know if there was some implication
No,
in there.
so I don't think so. I mean, maybe I would do an exhibition against one of the guys for my age, but no one, no young guys. But I really the real decision is that I didn't want to die, and and I realized it in my last couple of fights before I stopped, and I could have still competed, but to be the best, you have to be willing to die in the ring, and I didn't want to die in the ring anymore, and that doesn't only mean dying in a ring the night of the fight. It just also means about the mental state and the preparation that you go through to get ready for it. And so I know it sounds a little controversial, but I think in any sport, um, when you're in your teenage years, when you're young, when you're 12, 13, 14, when you're 22, 25, you don't think about it. It's like life is forever, and you get all of your joy and um, all of the things just looking for through competition, for me, through boxing, through winning, through training, through challenges, and that's like that was my only goal. And then you have kids, other things come up in your life, and you don't want to die anymore. And 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 that means die means for just a greater definition of it, just means to give it ultimately everything you got. And if it's a little bit, if it's an inch less, then you can't be the best anymore. And I didn't want to compete if I wouldn't give to myself and to the fans, what I owe to be the best. So that's the real answer.
Right. So you just got to a point in your life where it's like you have other things to live for, whereas earlier in life it's like, yeah, of course I'll die in
Yeah,
the ring. I'm
I
more,
didn't, and I went through after I stopped through some years of financial challenges, and I got offered fights for big money, and I could have taken them, but I didn't want to do that to myself because I gave my life to boxing. I don't want to be one of the guys that, and I'm not judging anyone because you have to do what you have to do. But I didn't, for myself, I didn't want to be one of the guys that had to get in the ring for the money. And you know, and I think the last fight was kind of, even though I didn't make a lot of money, but I was so financially challenged that the last fight was kind of more for the money than because I haven't fought in like a year and a half before that fight, and I just but it's all experiences, it's all life, and I'm very, very grateful for it. And you live and you learn, and you get stronger and move on to bigger and better things.
and at what point was that transition into promotion?
Well, that resistant promotion happened after my fight with Amir Khan. Actually, the first fight back after that, which was about 9 months later, I wanted to get back in the ring, and I met with different promoters, different managers, and I just did not want to commit myself to what they were wanting me to commit to, and I didn't see the vision for me for what through our meetings. So I saw some other people promote shows that were not on the elite level, and I thought to myself, well, I have a fan base, I have the relationships, and it's something that I wanted to do towards the end of my career. And I said, you know what, let me put it together. So for my decision to do it till September 1st, 2010 was 5.5 weeks, and it turned out to be a sold out event. We had sponsorships, it was on television, and so that was the first show I fought on. The second show I promoted, I got hired to run a Box NYC event, and my friend Jarrell Miller needed to stay busy, so I gave him a fight. He wasn't signed to me, but it's the first time I saw him fight as a pro. I was like, man, Jarrell, you're the future heavyweight champion of the world. And a couple of years after that, I signed him, and he had a chance to beat Anthony Joshua June 1st, 2019, but unfortunately, some things happened. But I still believe he got the skills to race to that level. But he's the first fighter I signed, which is pretty awesome.
That's a crazy first signing. I guess the last thing I'd like to ask about you and your career is, why was there never a fight between one of those guys in your weight neighborhood that were part of the series, be it Paulie, Edgar Santana was very popular at the time. Why was it that none of those fights ever came to be?
Yeah. So there were some discussions after both of us. I just had a memory pop up. Both Paulie and I fought on the first ever Barclays Center show, which Paulie defended his world title against Kano, I believe. And I fought on that show, and there was some talk of us fighting each other at the Barclays Centers, and obviously years before that. And Paulie's my friend. I have a lot of respect for Paulie, and we grew up together. But yes, it just didn't come to fruition. But while there were talks amongst fans, and there was never really any business talk about it. Besides some rumors, nothing really ever came through. But it would have been a great fight. Would have been great for New York City. But it wasn't meant to be.
So coming up, like you said, on June 3rd, we have the rematch between Claressa Shields and Hannah Gabriels. How did this fight come about? I mean, their first fight was, what was it, 4 or 5 years ago?
Their first fight was in 2018, and it's the first time that Claressa has gotten dropped. It's also was at that point in time the highest rated showbox event since in 5 years, and we got tremendous ratings for Claressa and for women's boxing. And Claressa has broken glass ceilings and made strides for women's sports and women's culture through her success in the ring, and her skills as a bridge to making the world a better place through her talent, which is boxing. And she is the Muhammad Ali, the Pele, the Jackie Robinson of this generation. She's the first person to ever fight at Little Caesars Arena, which is the premier venue in the city of Detroit, home of the Pistons, home of the Red Wings. Obviously, Detroit is not just any town. It's one of the cities that produce some of the best boxers in the world of boxing for decades. And there's been a bit of a standstill, but now it's coming back. And Claressa is opening up that building, which is so significant, being that she's from Flint, Michigan, and that she's a woman, and that she is who she is. And she's opening up the door for other Detroit talent, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of local fighters, all matched in competitive fights, just to reignite the fire and interest of boxing fans in the city of Detroit and worldwide, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's a great matchup. I thought the first fight was obviously very competitive, and it was the first time Claressa got dropped. I guess why now for this fight?
Well, Claressa's coming off her biggest career win against Savannah Marshall. I've never seen a fighter in the peak of their career go to someone else's home country, not to someone else's, to their rivals, to their toughest challengers, home country, and challenge them from the United States. I've never seen it, and Claressa has done it, and has shown how it's supposed to be done. So, and did an incredible job, and transformed into a superwoman, and kicked butt and took names. So meaning that she was first booed and then she was cheered. So it was in somebody else's country. So it was truly an incredible performance and a great privilege for me to have been involved with Claressa from really the beginning of her career to that incredible point. So we tried to make a fight with Tasha Jones. She turned the fight down. And then this opportunity that we've been working on this for a very long time for Claressa to fight in Detroit with the Caesars. It's a premier billion-dollar venue that opened up in downtown Detroit since 2017. They had WWE, they had UFC, they have the Pistons, they have the Red Wings, they have Bruce Springsteen, they have all the top performers, but they have never had boxing. And this opportunity with having a TV date and having the venue available came together, and it was too good to pass up. We always want to make the biggest and the best fights. Natasha Jonas was unavailable, and it made sense to do a fight with Hannah Gabriels, who gave Claressa one of her more challenging fights. So it just kind of came together and worked out well.
Wouldn't you agree that Shields versus Marshall was one of the best women's fights of all time? I mean, I was really that was an incredible fight.
I mean, I was sitting ringside and I was like, forget about it. It's just one of the best fights of all time. And I know Katie Taylor and Serrano was a good fight. It wasn't to me, and I'm people want to put fluff and kind of promote sometimes things that may or may not be 100% true. It was a great fight, and a lot of respect for Serrano, who I've seen since I'm a kid, and Katie Taylor, who I'm a big fan of. She's fantastic, but both of them are not in the league of Claressa Shields, and I think they both will admit it. And neither is Katie Taylor. And this is not to say anything negative. She's phenomenal. I'm a big fan of her. I love her personality. I love how she fights. I know her trainer Ross. She's fantastic. But it's almost like, it's like Floyd Mayweather, Roy Jones, and then other good fighters that are very good, but they're just not that level. And Claressa Shields, to an extent, she's even greater than Roy Jones and Mayweather, socially speaking, not boxing. I'm not going to judge on boxing, but because who she is and at the time that she has come about and what she has done for things outside the ring through her talent. And she's always fought the best, as Roy and Floyd have done as well. She's always fought the best. So I would say that even though not kind of like Katie Taylor versus Serrano maybe was Gotti Ward, kind of, maybe, but not really, but something like that. Meaning two good fighters, great fight. They gave it all they had and incredible, and I applaud them both. But but Claressa Shields, Savannah Marshall was that, but on a higher level. And Claressa is just two-time Olympic gold medalist, 3-division world champion, now 3-time undisputed champion, just so skilled. And when we first started working together, she said, Dmitry, make the biggest and the best fights. And that has been our path. And the reason why Katie Taylor is where she's at, and Serrano is where she's at, and Cecilia Brækhus is where she's at, even though she came before Claressa, is because Claressa did what she did and fought the tough fights, and the TV networks paid attention because of who she was, because of her background as a human, because of what she's overcome in Flint, Michigan, all the challenges that she's had, because she's won 2 Olympic gold medals, because she's from the United States. She's the first woman to ever be a main event on premium cable network television, which was on Showtime. That was our first fight together. And only after that, Cecilia Brækhus fought on HBO. So it's a coincidence. And then Katie Taylor fought on other broadcasts, and then ESPN had some women fights. And I'm not talking about Mia St. John and Cecilia and Lucia Riker, who were fantastic. But this is a different generation where there's amateur boxing and women's boxing can be sustainable because it's not just like some girl in town that is kind of like a black sheep that went to the gym. Now it's a system. It's an Olympic sport. I mean, it's been so for over a decade. So now women's boxing is sustainable. And Claressa, obviously, the fact that all these other women came before her helped kind of pave the way. But, Claressa was when you prepare the dish, you have to put salt on it for it to taste how it should taste. So Claressa was the final spice, and is the final spice that who knows who she is and who's carrying this, who understands the responsibility and is carrying the load. And again, a lot of respect, all the respect in the world to all the other champions, all the other women champions who are fantastic. And the fact that I'm praising Claressa is not taking anything away from them. And I hope what I say doesn't get construed and kind of misquoted.
Not overlooking anybody, every opponent is serious, but what are some of the fights that you see as the big fights for Claressa down the line?
So for Claressa down the line, I feel like because of who she is, where she fights is very meaningful. So for Claressa to fight in Africa and for Claressa to fight in the Middle East would be more powerful than the opponents. But I do believe that Natasha Jonas is a big fight down the road. I do believe that the winner of Marshall Franchon Cruz is a huge fight. I mean, if Marshall wins, the rematch is going to be ginormous. And if Franchon wins, look at Claressa. She made her pro debut against Franchon Cruz, who's the undisputed super middleweight champion of the world. Her pro debut. So actually, Bernard Hopkins, his pro debut was a loss. He lost to this guy, Clint something. And the guy that he lost to trained in Starrett City Boxing Club, which is where I started boxing, just to give you a little perspective. Just talking about great middleweights and super middleweights, and Franchon Cruz, I believe, fits that mold. So, I believe that the winner of Cruz Marshall, big fight for Claressa, and Natasha Jonas, big fight, and Cecilia Brækhus, if she wins, is a big fight for Claressa because of her legendary status and what she's done for women's boxing, and the fact that just because of her longevity.
I have to ask, is a fight potentially with Shadasia Green in the mix somewhere down the line?
That's a good question. So Shadasia is a very good fighter, but only you and maybe 20 other people know who she is at this point. And I mean this in the most respectful way. She's a very good fighter, but her brand has not progressed yet to the level where it'll make sense.
I guess the last thing I'll ask you is, who are some of the other guys that you're working with right now that either have something coming up or that you'd like to highlight and make sure people keep their eye out for?
Well, people know the heavyweights that I represent, but there's 2 guys that I want to feel like should be highlighted. That's Shorja Khanurgashev, who's in the IBF, working on the IBF mandatory position. He's going to be a force in the division. And Vladimir Shishkin, who beat Jose Oscarigui on Showtime in December. And I'm watching closely because if Canelo moves up to 175, then we're hoping that Vladimir can get a shot at the super middleweight world title because he's the official number 2 contender with that win. So we're working and looking forward to a great year. And I'm very excited about all the prospects. Oh yeah, one other guy that's very, very, very excited about. He is the guy. It's Ali Ismailov. He's fighting Charles Foster. He's 10-0. He's fighting Charles Foster in the main event of the June 9th Showbox Hall of Fame weekend. He's the USBA champion. He's phenomenal, and I'm very high on him. And June 9th is going to be his coming out party to a broad U.S. audience.
Very, very last one. What's it going to take to get Otto Ali in a big fight, man? Because, obviously
Yeah, I
he's
know.
like the most competitive fight with Tyson Fury in the last 5 years.
Yeah, so Otto, we've kept him busy. He's had 3 fights. The fight with Dillian White was scheduled October 31st, 2021. And then when Otto was on his way to the airport, Dillian White claimed an injury, and that fight didn't happen, and he fought Tyson Fury. So yeah, but we did what we had to do and kept Otto busy. Had some conversation with Eddie about Otto fighting Anthony Joshua. Doesn't look like that's going to happen at the moment, but yeah, I think that Otto is the guy. I feel like the heavyweight division is in a holding pattern because the big fights, because of these rumors of big fights of Tyson versus Usyk, and Joshua versus Wilder. So it's in flux, and when those fights get made, we'll have an easier time to position Otto in the right position. To put Otto in the right position.
Well, Dmitry, I really appreciate your time today, champ. Is there anybody, anyone, anything you want to shout out before we wrap this up?
Just shout out the boxing fans because they make the sport go round, and we as a sport have to be inclusive, not exclusive. These events that I have June 3rd and June 9th, I try to work with everybody, bring in different promoters and different managers, because for the sport to grow and for the fans to get excited, we have to work with one another and be inclusive and make the big fights and work together to grow the sport. One of the reasons why the UFC has been so successful is because they were first, and and because of their size, they're able to promote the new sport, in a very organized way. And boxing is fragmented and hasn't been able to do that in a consistent way. But I'm very happy that the Ryan Garcia Davis undercard pay-per-view did so well. It's so good for boxing. The fact that Creed was number one in the box office shows that boxing is alive and well.
Well, so, and I think you're right. And I think that in order for boxing to thrive, it's like it has to be a collaborative effort more so.
Yep. So I'll see you on June 3rd.
Well, I appreciate it, champ. Thanks for coming on.